Let us just look at one more aspect of 8th century Israel before we move on to a discussion of the Babylonian period. One of the fascinating chapters, in some places it's just a footnote, in other places it's extremely important, is the Samaritan community, which has a fascinating origin story, actually multiple origin stories, and the intersection between the Samaritans and the mainstream Jewish community are quite significant in the ancient world. Let's have a look at who these people are and where they came from. So the Samaritans are quite an old people. They certainly stretch back into biblical times, and there are still several hundred of them living in Israel today, centered around the city of Nablus. In Hebrew, the name of that town is Shechem, and especially Mount Gerizim, Har Gerizim, which is also figured in the Bible and has some extremely important moments throughout its history. Where did they come from? Who are these Samaritans? So the biblical account of their origins is described in the second book of Kings, chapter 17, towards the end, where there's a discussion of the exiles of the Israelite nations, the 10 tribes from the northern kingdom going out to Babylon. We talked a little bit about that in the previous video. At the same time, there was a population transfer. This was a very well-known Assyrian technique to try and control their rapidly expanding empire. They would take out, especially the elite, the leadership of a particular community, and they would transplant another community with limited ties, with different loyalties, a minority, and it would break up the traditional power structures. So they brought in, as described in the book of Kings, people from the region of Babylon. That's a city. Babylonia is the region or the empire, and a city called Kuta, which will be significant because the Samaritans in Talmudic literature will be called Kutim, meaning those who come from Kuta. And they settled them in the region of Samaria to replace much of the local population for reasons that we have discussed. Now that is basically the Jewish account as described in the Bible. The Samaritans, on the other hand, have a different account. There are several of them, but one of the most well-known is that actually they believe they go back to the original 10 tribes of Israel. They were Jews like all the other Jews, but there was a conflict over who was going to be the high priest. And Eli, who figures very prominently at the beginning of the book of Samuel, he took the Aron Kodesh, the tabernacle with the tablets of the law in them, and moved them south to Shiloh, away from Har HaGrizim, from Nablus, and created a separate religion altogether, which we now call Judaism. The original inhabitants, the Samaritans, say they just kept moving along with their original Torah, and so they don't hold with any of this foreign importation theory. They believe that they are actually the original Israelites who are observing the old-time religion, and it is the rest of the population of Israel who are the innovators who have perverted the traditional religion. It's fascinating, and of course the material goes so far back, there are no written sources for this, but nevertheless this is a very different account of their origins. Not surprisingly, the Samaritans and the Jews, the people living in Judah and Benjamin, and the people living now in the Assyrian-dominated northern part, the northern kingdom of Israel, are not getting along so well. There's all kinds of conflicts between them that just expand over the centuries, as we shall encounter as we go through these lectures. But we should note that the religion that the Samaritans practice is very similar to Judaism in a lot of ways. They have, for example, a Torah, which is in many ways really close to the Torah that the Jews revere. It also shows evidence of being closer to the Greek translation of the Torah, a few other interesting things like that, but obviously there are massive diversions. For example, the 10 commandments are actually the 9 commandments, because a few of them are combined to get a smaller count, although coveting is actually increased. They made coveting a little bigger and separated it out different kinds of coveting. But commandment number 10 is wholly new. It isn't in the Jewish Torah, and that is the reverence for Mount Gerizim. And of course, on that holy mountain, they still practice a lot of the ancient rituals that that Jews associate with Har Zion, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Fascinating kind of differences between them. Also, huge difference, the Samaritans lack the oral Torah, which is so central to understanding Judaism. We're going to come back to that in about 4 lectures or so and try to understand what is the oral Torah, how does it shape the Jewish approach to their religion, and so on. But for the time being, the Samaritans have a kind of a parallel Torah, but without the oral Torah. And as you can see, even from their mode of dress, holding up the Sefer Torah, there are certain similarities that, harmonies between them. That harmony was not always achieved in real life. We're going to talk about the ongoing conflict with the Samaritans as we move through the Babylonian and the Roman period in particular. But for now, I'd just like to point out a couple things. First of all, in the Talmud, there is a long-ranging debate that seems to take a couple centuries to resolve on the question of who are these Kutim? Who are these people, the Samaritans? Again, they're named in the Talmudic tradition after the city of Kuta. There's a body of rabbis who feel that, they did actually accept the Torah when they came to the land of Israel. Other rabbis, pointing once again to the Book of Kings, say that their conversion was motivated by fear. According to the biblical account, they were attacked by lions. They weren't sure what to do about it. So and conversion was a way of saving themselves. And so some rabbis would say that the conversion is not valid. And so there's a long debate going on. And there's some really interesting discussions there. Do you count them, for example, as a quorum to say the special prayers when saying a blessing after a meal? Do they count in that or not? Essentially, do they count in a minyan? Fascinating kind of questions. In the end, the conclusion is no, the rabbis do not consider the Kutim to be Jews, but the fact that they have this long-running discussion is indicative of how close they came to that status. There's ongoing political and social tensions, in particular when there is a triangular power relationship, when there is a third party like the Persians or like the Greeks or like the Romans who are involved, and the Samaritans and the Jews sometimes find themselves jockeying against each other for power within a larger context. And there's some fascinating stories also according to the Talmud about the Samaritans interfering with some basic Jewish communications, such as lighting fires on the top of mountains as signal flares to indicate the beginning of a new month. By the sighting of the moon in Jerusalem, but lighting them at different times, which threw off the communication system completely. It's kind of like people, making crank calls or something like that, or robocalls, if you will. Well, maybe not exactly a robocalls, but you get the idea. One last detail, which comes from the 1st century, from the Christian scriptures, which gives you an indication of how the Samaritans regarded. It is, of course, the parable of the Good Samaritan. In English, the term Good Samaritan means someone who goes out of his way to help out. There are hospitals named after the Good Samaritan and so on. The parable goes in the book of Luke that there's this guy who's like mugged and bleeding on the road. And you can see here in this particular picture by Van Cort Bende. I don't know who that is, but I think it's a fascinating picture. And several other Jewish figures walk past him, right? He's a Jewish guy lying bleeding on the road, and there is a Kohen who walks by and says, oh, I don't want to get involved. And there is a Levite who walks by and says, no, I don't want to get involved. And it is the Samaritan who steps up and says, oh my gosh, this man is hurt. I better take care of him. He picks him up, takes him to an inn, and so on. When you read that story, the important note is that when the gospel is written, the Samaritans were basically the enemies of the Pharisees. They were people that they never got along with. And the point in the book of Luke is that it is the Samaritan, it is the person you would least likely to help out, who actually helps the stranger. And the other people let him down. And so it is a good Samaritan, with the emphasis on the word Samaritan. Or if you want, it's a good Samaritan as opposed to all the others. That's so surprising about the book of Luke. We're going to talk a lot more about reading the Christian scriptures from a Jewish perspective in a few lectures, but for the time being, I just wanted to leave it here. Okay, we're going to come back to the Samaritans a lot as we go through the Persian and the Greek and the Roman period, but for now I just want to say thanks very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this brief video.